Chapter 1. Should you even keep going? Grit serves you no purpose if you are performing the wrong action. Blind persistence sometimes holds you back from achieving your goals. Best selling author Seth Godin points out in his book, The Dip, the extraordinary benefits of knowing when to quit and when to stick. That if you are not going to put in the effort to do your best, you might as well quit. Consequently, the most important question you should ask yourself before you even start learning how to keep going is, should I even keep going or should I give up? If you want to find the answer for the correct answer to this question, we must first need to explore the concept of the dip a little bit more. Understanding the dip. The graph below illustrates the concept of the dip. This is the graph. Time, energy, and results. When you start out, you enjoy a short term period of rapid growth. You lose your first couple of pounds, you make your first sale, you say your first sentence in a foreign language, or you drive the first mile on a motorcycle. After the initial gratifying period, things get harder. You no longer improve so quickly, or even worse, you feel stuck, unable to push through the obstacles. In his book, Seth Godin says that if something is worth doing, there is probably a dip to experience. The dip creates scarcity, which in turn leads to exceptional value possessed by the few people who endure it. The longer you endure the dip, the closer you are to success. Yet, most people who have found themselves in the dip give up before they can get out of it. In some cases, they make the right decision. They say time and effort they would otherwise spend on something they shouldn't have been doing in the first place. In other cases, they throw away all the progress they have made so far. Now, how do you decide whether you should give up or keep going? There are several questions to ask. When should you give up? Quitting in the dip usually seems like a bad idea. After all, you have already invested a lot of time and effort into doing something. However, we humans don't act as rationally as we think. Persistence isn't always the answer to all your problems. Before you skip this chapter and tell yourself you surely shouldn't quit, consider the sunk cost fallacy. If you believe in a don't waste philosophy, you are affected by this bias. Let's say you went to the college, but 1 year later, you are no longer motivated to keep going. The decision to quit would make more sense than forcing yourself to do something for which you no longer have enthusiasm. Yet, most people would consider the year spent studying too large of an investment to quit. They think of it as a waste of resources. Even though staying at the college would lead to even more waste, many people would irrationally keep going. Consequently, the first question you should ask yourself is whether you want to keep going just because of what you have already invested. If it's your primary motivation, chances are you would be much better off quitting right now. Seth Godin argues that if you are not invested enough to become the best in the world in what you are trying to achieve, you might as well quit. If you are setting for mediocrity, the decision to quit will benefit you more than merely trying to be okay at something. Best selling author and multimillionaire Richard Koch points out in his book, Living the 80-20 Way, that the key to success is to limit your focus to things that mirror your individuality. You can't be the best at everything, and persistence pays the biggest dividends when you focus on what you are truly best at. Coach's and Gordon's approach is valid for people who want to achieve big career goals. However, it doesn't necessarily apply to smaller goals like learning a foreign language or learning another side skill where the objective isn't to become a world class performer. Before you quit because you realize you can't be the best in the world, in what you want to achieve, ask yourself why you are doing it. Perhaps you will never become a proficient Spanish speaker, but your basic communication skills will suffice you enough to travel Spanish speaking countries. If, on the other hand, your goal is to become surgeon, but you are not so fired up you want to become the best in the world, do yourself a favor and give up now. The last thing to consider when making the decision to keep going or give up is to ask yourself if you still have enthusiasm, both for the process and for the goal. There's a difference between short term discouragement and long term lack of enthusiasm and loss of the entire vision. If your vision no longer fires you up, the decision to quit is likely to turn out more beneficial than sticking to it. A couple of examples of when I gave up and made the right choice. To help you better understand how to quit strategically, I will share with you several examples from my life. Many successful people I admire are capable of programming, so I figured out it could be a useful skill to develop. I enrolled in a programming course and invested several days in learning the basics of programming. What was fun in the beginning soon turned into something extremely confusing and frustrating. I quit, I quit several days later when I realized technology has never been my forte and my strengths lay somewhere else. If I knew what I know now, I wouldn't have even started. There was no chance I would go past mediocrity. In fact, it was extremely unlikely I would understand even the basics of programming. It lay so far outside my expertise, skill set, and interest. It was a project destined for failure. The realistic and goal wouldn't satisfy me. So quitting was a better choice. Another example related to programming was my idea to run a software dependent company. It started out well, but even though the idea had a lot of potential, I couldn't find enough enthusiasm to keep going. It's hard to grow a business if you can't get fired up to provide value to your clients. Several people told me I should keep going since I already invested a considerable amount of money and time into this project. I decided against listening to them and gave up. I freed up time and energy to focus on a completely unrelated project that turned out to be a much better fit that played off my strengths. I couldn't have been happier with my decision. Every author will tell you that the hardest part of writing a book is the middle of the story. It's where most writers get stuck. Some of them, too, never finish their first work. I also quit on several of my stories, but I also had several books where I went past this phase. The difference was the story and the characters, the why of the book. If I knew where the story was going and liked my characters, I could push through the hardest part of writing when you bang your head against the wall in frustration. If I didn't have the entire vision in mind, I figured it was better to quit. If I wasn't enthusiastic enough to keep writing it, no reader would be enthusiastic enough to read it either. Should we even keep going? A quick recap. First, the dip is the moment when you experience little reward and lack motivation to keep going. The longer you persevere during this phase, the closer you are to success. Everybody experiences the dip when working on something worthwhile. There is no workaround. Second, the sunk cost fallacy can make you keep going when it's better to give up. If your sole motivation to stick to your goals is to not lose what you have already invested, you might be better off giving up. Third, if you are not willing to do your best but expect extraordinary results, give up now. It's a waste of time to be mediocre while you could work on something you are great at. Fourth and the last one, if you no longer have the passion for your goal, give up. Don't mistake short-term discouragement with lack of enthusiasm though. If you have been working on your goals for several weeks with little to no enjoyments, it's probably no longer the right goal for you.